Yeah, so today is Hey Nisan, and Hey Nisan is the yahrzeit of the Abderuv, otherwise known as the Oyev Yisrael. Rabbi Nayowitz, remember Rabbi Nayowitz? So he has a son-in-law, his name is Yisrael Lover. So they call him the Oyev Yisrael. So the Oyev Yisrael, my favorite book that he has on Chamisha Chom Shtars, wherever he went, he saw Ahavas Yisrael. He had rose-colored glasses. So somebody once asked him, there's one parish in the Torah that's full of sinas Yisrael and cursing Klal Yisrael. That's Parshas Balak, right? Balak wanted to belong to curse Klal Yisrael. So where, he asked, do you see Ahavas Yisrael in Parshas Balak? So the Abdu says that's the easiest to answer. Balak is Rosh Hashanah. V'ahavta l'reyacha kamoicha. So the Chusad Rebbe, v'ahavta is spelled with a vav, not a vase, and kamoicha is spelled with a kaf, not a kuf. So the Abdu said, now you're being a stickler, a captain, you're makbid, it should be just so. Someone who has these hakpadas could never have Ahavas Yisrael. You have to be able to look away. But he's very negeya to our Masechta of Chalitza, because he was only born through a Chalitza. Remember that story? The story of the Abdu was, where is the Abdu buried? Does anybody know where he's buried? He's buried in Mezbus. So if he's the Abdu, why is he buried in Mezbus? The answer is, because at the pinnacle of his career, he got up one day and he resigned. And everybody in the Tzkila asked him, why are you resigning? We pay you well. We're machabed you. Like, why would you resign in the middle of your career? So he said, I will tell you a story that occurred 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there was a couple that died. Both the parents died and left over two little twin boys. And they had to find a foster family for these two twin boys. In those days, people couldn't even afford to support their own children. To take in another child, to take in two children, that was impossible. So they had to split these children up and farm them out to two different families. So one of these two boys was sent to a family that lived in the city of Apt to raise. And the other one of these two families were sent to some small village. And both of these children grew up. The one that grew up in Apt ended up becoming very wealthy and very successful. And the one that was in this other village was poverty-stricken his whole life. But neither of them were zoichet to have children. When the very wealthy man from Apt got older, he fell sick and he felt that he was going to die. And when people are dying, they tend to have flashbacks and review the events of their life. And it dawned on him that he had a brother. He had a twin brother. So he's thinking to himself, if I die, my wife is going to fall to Chalitza, which will make her an aguna unless we find my brother. So he tells her, he calls his wife, and he tells his wife, we have a little bit of a problem. We have a little bit of a problem. And I always wondered, why didn't he just give her a get? But now that we're learning Masechah Yevamos, we know that there's an either of a tikkun for the neshama, even to have Chalitza. So she said, what should we do? So he said, let's not get so nervous, because how far could he possibly be? He's probably within the region somewhere. So I'm going to write a series of letters to all of the Rabbanim from all of the communities around us, and we'll describe exactly who we're looking for. And we know the description because I know it was an identical twin. And maybe one of the Rabbanim will know who the person is that we're looking for, who my brother is. And that's what he did, and then he passed away. A couple of months after he was nifter, the almana gets a letter from a Rav stating that we found the man that we believe is your brother-in-law. So she writes a letter to that Rav and says, my husband left me a very wealthy widow. If this man comes and does chalitza to me, I will give him half of my husband's fortune that I now yarsh. So when the Rav got that letter, he knew that he would easily be able to arrange financing on behalf of this brother to get a train ticket. So he spoke to a wealthy balabos and he says, listen, I need you to lend this guy money for a train ticket, but you have nothing to be concerned about, because when he comes back, he's going to be a wealthy man. So he lined up the ticket, and then he calls him this man. He says, Yanko, I have news for you. We need you to go to Chalitza. And he explained to him what was going on, and he told him that he already had arranged for financing. So this person says, yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I can't just leave for several months. I must, ask my wife if she's okay with that. So she tells his wife what happened and that he's going to become a wealthy man. And his wife says, my dear husband, how often do you have an opportunity to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Kriyishma? He says twice a day. And how often do you have the opportunity to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Shabbos? He says once a week. And how often do you have the opportunity to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Hallel? He says once a month. And how often do you have the opportunity to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Shofar? He said once a year. And how often do you have the opportunity to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Chalitza? And he said once in a lifetime. So his wife tells him, this is a mitzvah that comes to you once in a lifetime, and you're going to sell it for money? I want you to make a shvua right now that you're not going to take a penny for this chalitza. And in fact, he made a shvua. Suddenly that loan he had for the train ticket dried up. So he had to walk for weeks, not months, to get to this village. When he arrived, he was like a tattered vagabond, but they mechabered him and they took him in, and he made chalitza. As soon as he made the chalitza, his sister-in-law points to the door of the shul. They open the door of the shul, and there's a wagon there loaded up with gold coins. And she says, my dear brother-in-law, this is what I'm giving you. This is your half of the Yerusha. So he says, I'm sorry, my dear sister-in-law, my dear chalutza, I can't take the money because I made a shul. I wouldn't take a penny. And she says, how dare you? I told you I was going to give you the money. And they were fighting. So he says, now I know for sure we're related because we're already fighting and we just met. So she said, I cannot take this money back because I've already promised that I'm going to give it to you. And he said, well, I cannot take this money because I made a shvua, I wouldn't take it. So they made a deal. They decided that they're going to donate the money to the congregation, to the Kehillah of Abt. This is all a story that the Abtaru is relating. And he says, with this Yid's walking home without a penny to his name, the Shemayim V'aretz were shaking, and the Gzeira broke that he couldn't have children. And when he got home, they had a son. You know who that son was? Asked Abtaru. It was me. So I knew that my father and my aunt had deposited a lot of money in the Kehillah of Abt. And I only took this job because I knew that all that money was coming to me. According to my calculations, the Kehillah has already returned all of that money. So that's why I'm quitting. So that's the Maisa of the Abtaru with Chalitza. Thank you, Duvi, for reminding me.
Bought me 10 minutes.
What?
Duvi bought me 10 minutes.
Kavaldi. Okay, so that's the story of the Abtaru. And this is Yosy Simon Yevamos Daf. Yesterday, we discussed the power of Maimer. We said that Beis Shammai holds that Maimer is strong enough to push off an erva. So if someone did Maimer in one sister, it would automatically make it that the other sister didn't fault him to Yibam, but we also said that she would still need Chalitza. Then the Gemara had a Shaila, when someone makes Maimer, does it create a bond of Ersin or a bond of Nesuin? The nafkamina was after someone made Maimer, can he still be miyabim this woman against her will? Or now we switch to the Kedushin track, where in order to do Nesuin, he needs to get her agreement. We are on the first wide line at the bottom of Chof Tes Amud Beis, the first wide line. Toshma. Shemeres Yavim, a Shemeres Yavim. Bein Yavim Echad, Bein Shnei Yavim. So we have a case where a woman fell to Yibum and she fell to one of two brothers. So even if there's two brothers who she fell to, and then she made a nether. So normally if a woman makes a nether, the first time the husband hears it, he has the opportunity to say that the nether is bought. What about a Shemeres Yavim? Which means a woman lost her husband and she fell to Yibum, to one person or to two people, and then she made a nether. Can this person who is going to do the Yibum, or one of the two brothers who might do the Yibum, can they be made for the nether? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar says, whether she fell to one or to two, they can be made for her nether. And we're soon going to see which one of the two, in the case of two, which one of the two will be made for the nether. If there's only one brother who's there to do Yibum, so that's a strong Zika, and that gives him enough power to be made for. But if she fell to one of two brothers, neither Zika is strong enough to allow them to be made for. We had this distinction between if we know for sure there's only one brother who can possibly do the Ibam, where there's a stronger Zika, versus if there's two potentials, the two brothers, there the Zika is considered weaker. Your wife, you could be made for her nether. Your Shemeres Yavim, you cannot be made for her nether. And the Gemara challenged this machlokes that we had. B'shlomo Rabbi Akiva. I understand Rabbi Akiva's shita very simply. Sover ain't zika. Afilu lechad. There's not zika is not strong enough to make it like the shomer, like the brother is like a husband that he can make hafaras nadar. Rabbi Yeshua, according to Rabbi Yeshua, I understand it as well. Lechad yesh zika. There's only one brother who she felt even to. That's a strong zika that allows him to make hafaras nadar. L'trei, if there's two brothers, ain't zika. The zika is not strong enough. So those two shittas I understand. Elul Rabbi Lazar, who says Yafer, Nehinami de Kasavar Yezika, even if you hold that he says Yezika, it makes sense. Bishlem Lachad. I understand that there's only one brother who might ibum, he could be made for her Nadarim. Elul Trey Amai. How is it possible that if there's two brothers, any one of the brothers could do mimer? That doesn't make any sense, because if anything, you need both. Rashi says here on the fourth wide line, Ninami diezika afil letrei miu yafru shneim iboyle. The lashon of Rashi is yafer. One of them does hafar to learn. If anything, you need both brothers to make the hafar for it to be good. Zok to Gemara, Rabami explained over there. The reason why only one brother does the hafara is because that brother happened to have done mimer. So now we're already highlighting what mimer does. So the mimer gives one of the two brothers the right to make hafaras nadar, Uvei Shammai, and we also need to bring in Bei Shammai, who says the Amar mimer koine kinyan gomer, and it's working with Bei Shammai, who holds it's koine kinyan gomer. So if you hold according to Bei Shammai, therefore the mimer makes it like she's Nesua Mishamacha Mefer. That would explain why this man, who's considered Nesua to her, could make the Afaris Nadarim. If all it does is makes like an Erison, Heichi Motzi Mefer. How could someone who merely made Kedushin on a woman, but not made Nesuin yet, that person cannot do Afaris Nadarim, because we know that from a Mishnah. But now Naira Hamirurasa, a woman who only has the Erison, but not Nesuin, it requires joined forces. The father has a koyach in her, the Baal has a koyach in her, and therefore both would have to be made for her nether. But here it says Yafer, the one man only, the husband, or the Shemer Shavim who did mimer could be made for her. But even a regular Erison wouldn't be able to. Elamai, it must be that mimer does nesuin, and that's why it's Yafer. That's why even the husband alone, without the Baal, without the father, could be made for. No, it doesn't mean that. Really, even according to Beis Shammai, mimer only does Erison. You're going to say he can't make Alfara by himself, he needs the father? That's exactly what Rebbe Lezer meant. My Mefer B'Shutfus. He means that one of the two brothers, the one that didn't die, the one that did mimer, he is the one who, together with the father, could make Alfara. Practically more, Rebbe Lezer, mimer Beis Shammai Einakaina Ella Litchos Litzara Belvad. According to Rebbe Lezer, who said that really the koyach of mimer is weak. All it does is they were able to reject her sister from falling to Yibum, to this man who made mimer. Why would you even let him be made for b'shutnus? Amalach Rebbe Lezer, Eimer de Amri Ana Eina Koina Ela Litchos Litzara Belvad Deloy Sagi La Begita. All I meant when I said that mimer is not koina in Gantin, that's only legavi one prat, and that is that after one makes mimer, they still need chalitza. But it doesn't mean that the intensity of the mimer doesn't work. But I never said that according to Beis Shammai, the strength of the bond created by mimer wouldn't be enough to give him the schus to be made for his nedarim. So therefore, that's not a kasha. You could look at mimer from different ways. Mimer has certain strengths and certain weaknesses. It does have a strength to give the person who made mimer the status of a husband to make hafara, but it still doesn't eliminate the original zikah, and chalitza will still be required. According to Rab Nachman, who said earlier that it means mefer b'shutvis, what, you think that's a good teretz? That's not a good teretz. Mikatanu yifru, Yofer katani. Once again, it says Yofer. It doesn't say that him together with the father can make hafara. So I don't like your teretz anyway. Your whole svara of Bishutzas doesn't fit into the words of the Brisa. The Brisa seems to indicate that one person alone makes the hafara. It's not a combined effort between the husband and the father. What you have to say in order to explain why the husband of an arusa, in this case, can be the exclusive person to make the hafara and doesn't need the father, is she'amda bedin upasku la mezaynos mishalot. The person who's responsible to support this woman, normally, if you make kedushin to a woman, but you didn't make nesuin, you're not yet obliged to support her. So you don't totally control her, therefore you have to share your hafara rights with her father. But if during the erison, you already were accepted upon yourself a financial obligation to support her, that changes the rules of hafara. A woman who makes a nether always has in mind to be subservient to the man who's supporting her. And since now it's the husband alone who's supporting her, even though it's only erison, but since now he's supporting her, when she makes a nether, she, in her mind, accepts upon herself the veto of her husband. And therefore, it's only his veto that counts because he is supporting her now. Now we're going to get into the four Mishnayos of brothers. And it's very similar Mishnayos to one another with slight differences that create a big nafkamina l'halacha. But we're all talking about very similar cases. Shloisha Achim, there's three brothers, let's call them Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shnai Mehen, Reuven and Shimon, Nusun Shtei Achayos, are married to two sisters, Rachel and Esther. I'm sorry, Leah and Rachel. I don't know why I mixed Esther in here. Leah and Rachel. Leah and Rachel. So Reuven and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel. Be'echad and Levi, Nasu Nachas, he's married to Esther. So you have Leah, Rachel, and Esther. Esther is not related to Leah and Rachel. And you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. So Reuven is married to sister A, Leah. Shimon is married to sister B, Rachel. Levi is married to a complete stranger, Esther. Now, Meis Echad Mibale Echayis. Rachman Litzlan, Reuven dies. So if Reuven dies, his wife or his almana falls to Yibam, not to Shimon, because Shimon is already married to Rachel, who's a sister. So she really only falls to Yibam, to Levi, who is married to Esther. The Kanas Nasi Nachrish is sister. So now Levi did Yibam, and now Levi is married to Esther as well as to Leah, and Shimon is married to Rachel. Umeis, and now Levi dies. So there's two women who could potentially fall to Shimon. One of these women is the sister of Shimon's wife, Leah, and the other one is the tzara of the sister of Shimon's wife. So the halachas are Yishayna Yotza Mishum Achos Isha. Leah does not fall to Yibum to Shimon because she is the sister of Shimon's wife, Rachel. Ushnia, and Esther doesn't either fall to Yibum to Shimon, Mishum Tzarasa, because she is the tzara of the erba. Right? It's a very simple illustration of one of the cases of the first Mishnah of the Masech. What happens if Asav Amaimer? Levi didn't make full Yibum yet on Leah, on Reuven's Almana, but he made a Kedushin, he made Maimer. So now she's not 100% Levi's spouse yet. She'll still remain Aser to Shimon because of the Chosisha, but the question is, does she infect the Tzara since she's not fully married yet to Levi? The halacha is, if he only made Maimer, Umeis, and then Levi dies, Nachris Charletzas V'loy Misyavemos. Since we don't know if Levi is considered married to Leah or not, Esther, who for sure was married to Levi, she does require chalitza. We don't say that she walks out clear. Well, so Frank the Gemara, Taima the Ovid B'Maimer. Why does she even require anything? Is because Maimer was made. Haloy Ovid B'Maimer. What if there was no Maimer made? Meaning, Reuben died. Now Leah fell to Yibam only to Levi because Shimon is married to Leah's sister, and now there's a zika. There's a zika between Leah, Reuben's almana, and Levi, but he didn't act on the zika yet. So if it's a loy avid b'maimer, then it seems from our Mishnah that nachris yibume yame miyabma. The only reason why the nachris cannot do yibum and we have to do chalitza is because we're afraid that she is considered a tzara, a co-wife of Leah. But if no mimer was made, the zika wouldn't be considered anything to asher the tzara, because if it would be, then the Mishnah could have said a bigger chiddush. Even if Lo Yosef B'Maimer, I mean, in the first case, even if it's Lo Yosef B'Maimer, even there should be Chalitzus Lo Mishav. But the Mishnah says, no, Zika is nothing. The fact that there was a Zika that made this Tzara a co-wife of the Erva, there's no problem at all. On Rab Nachman, Zoy Shemeres, you see quite clearly from our Mishnah that Ein Zika V'afilu B'chad Acha, even if the only person here to do Yibam was Levi, so it's not even a diluted Zika. It's clear that the Zika is only to Levi. If he didn't do anything with that Zika, she will not aser the wife of Levi from Yibum. So there's no problem of Tzaras Erva if the relationship is Zika alone.
Very wide. The name Zika, so long as it's because Levi's not alive anymore. That's why it's Zika. While Levi's alive, there's a Zika there.
Okay, and Nechami, but whatever it is, it doesn't poison the Tzara. Now, I want to highlight something very, very important. Who is Levi's wife? Levi's wife is Esther. She is the Nachlis. So there's no Isser on her. The question is, can the Zika poison a perfectly good wife? So the Zika is not strong enough to poison a perfectly good wife, right? Because we're going to have another case, the opposite. So right now, here is she's a Levi's wife. Esther, a perfectly good wife. There's no reason why she shouldn't fall to Yibum, to Shimon. There's no reason why she shouldn't fall to Shimon. The question is, well, the fact that there was a Zika between her husband and an Erva, can that poison that relationship? The answer to that is an unequivocal no.
While he was alive, there was two of them. Right? There was Shimon and Levi.
So Reuben died, and now there's two brothers of Shimon and Levi. No, Reuben's wife didn't fall to Shimon because Shimon was married to Reuben's wife's sister. So it was only a Zika to one person. Zok the Gemara, Zok the Heilige Mishnah, another case. Similar, but not the same. Shloisha Achim, there's three brothers. Again, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, and Baruch Hashem, they're still married to Leah, Rachel, and Esther. Shnaim em nesum shtei achayos, Leah and Rachel are sisters. The Echad and Levi is married to Nasu Nachrish to Esther. The Meis HaNasu Nachrish. So now, instead of killing Reuben, now we're killing Levi. So when the Nasu Nachrish died, when Levi died, now Esther is a stranger both to Leah and to Rachel. So now she fell to Yibam to either Reuben or Shimon. And Reuben, let's say, did Yibam. V'chanas echad mi balei achayois es ishta. And one of the two brothers, let's say Reuben, married Esther. So now Reuben has two wives. He has Leah and he has Esther. And Shimon is married to Rachel, who's Leah's sister. Umeis. And now Reuben dies. And now these two women fall to Yibam to Shimon. So the same halacha, Leah will not fall to Shimon because Leah is the achayis isha. Ushniya and Esther is mishum tzaras. Also, b'maimer, what if Reuben didn't koinus? He wasn't koinus Esther yet when he died. Rather, he just made maimer on Esther. Umeis he died. Nachris chayletzes v'loy mishavemos. So this seems to be the same case. The difference is here, his wife was for sure awesome, because his wife, Reuben's wife, Reuben's real wife, Leah, is a sister to Shimon's wife, Rachel. So she's for sure awesome. The question is if she will poison the tzara, who's not the real wife. So in the first case, the tzara was the real wife. The question is, the Nachri was the real wife. Esther was the real wife. The question is will Leah poison her? Here it's the opposite. Here's Leah's the real wife, and the question is, will the real wife be able to poison the other tzara? Exactly. A perfectly good tzara. Very good. So Zaktimar Hasul Amali, why is it that this Mishnah repeats the case with this small variation. If anything, in this case, it's even more mistaber. Hashta, Uma Hasan, Madich in the first Mishnah, the Achais Isha have a tzara l'nachris. The Achais Isha was the tzara to the nachris. The nachris was really the wife of Levi, who would fall to Shimon for Yibum. Nevertheless, we said, Amrit Nachris Asura. We said that the woman who merely fell to Yibum and had Maimer had the power to passel the Nachris as well as Tzaras Erva. Hacha, in the second case, the Nachris have a Tzara Lachazisha, where the real wife is Osir. The Nachris is the one who he made Maimer on. Like surely you shouldn't be able to do Yibum on her. So the problem here is the second Mishnah is more poshut in halacha than the first Mishnah. So once we add the first Mishnah to tell us that the erva passels the Sarah, kol shekain the real wife who's a tzara should passel the nachris who's a shomer sham. Zakt Gemara, you're right. You're 100% right. The second Mishnah is a smaller kiddush. But what happened was Tana Hach Tana Beresha. First, the Tana actually said the second Mishnah, which is the smaller Kiddush. The Hach, and then only then did he actually extend it to the bigger Kiddush. So let me just see. Aleph Chaja Latera B'Shari. And then he thought maybe in the first Mishnah it would also be mutter. I'm sorry. In the first Mishnah, he thought it would be mutter, and she wouldn't answer her tzara, because the nachris was the real wife of Levi. So v'hach chaja l'ter b'shari. So therefore, he only mentioned the second Mishnah and not the first Mishnah, because yes, the first Mishnah is a bigger chiddush, and he didn't hold it at chiddush yet, and there he would have held that the mimer wouldn't have caused a problem. But hadar, and then he reconsidered chaja li'isura, and he changed his mind to what the psakim is our Mishnah, that if there was Maimer, it would create an issue. So why did he put the Chiddushdike halacha first and not after this Mishnah that we just learned? Is because va'adi de chavivale, since it was a bigger Chiddush, it was more dear to him. Akdama, when he placed it in to the parak, he decided to place it earlier than the halacha that was more pasha to him. So why didn't he just delete this Mishnah? Once you have a bigger Chiddush, I don't need the smaller Chiddush. Once people already knew the Mishnayos, he didn't want to take the Mishnah out. And we had this svara once before, and that is, everything was Teres Halapeh, nothing was written down in those days. So people remembered things in a cycle. They remembered the order. They had it all set up in line in their head. If he would start taking things out, it would mess up people's memory. And therefore, even though he needed to add an extra halacha, he wouldn't take out anything not to ruin someone's concentration. Right? Somebody already knew that after this Mishnah comes this Mishnah. So therefore, he didn't want to mess things.
I think he wasn't able. He's not able to get rid of the Mishnah. Remember, I don't know. He's not forgetting, right? What's his name? It's just for comment that we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know who the time of this Mishnah is. Yeah. Okay. Let's see the next Mishnah. Again, it's similar, but a little bit different. Shlosh Achim. You have your Reuben, Shimon, and Levi again. And then Shnai men Nesuim Shtei Achayos. Reuben and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel. Echad Nas and Nachris, and Levi is married to Esther. Meis Echad mi Balei Achayos. Reuben dies, Rachman Latlan, and Leah falls to Yibum, only to Levi, because Shimon is married to her sister. The Chanas Nasu Nachris as Ishtay. Levi married Reuben's almana. So now Levi is married to Esther and Leah. And then Umeisa Ishtay Shel Sheni. And then who dies? Shimon's wife dies. Shimon's wife dies. Once that Umeisa Ishtay Shel Sheni, and Shimon's wife dies. So now Shimon is a free agent. Okay, he's no longer married to the sister of Leah. The Achakach Meis Nasu Nachris. And now Levi dies, and Levi's two wives, who's Leah, who was the almana of Reuben once upon a time, and Esther, who was always his wife, they fall to Shimon to Yibum. So Zok the Gemara, Harezu Asura I love Elamis, Hoyel Benesra love Sha'achas. Since this woman was usher to him, she remains usher to him. So let's see Rashi. The Chanta Magar Shemeis. The loch is the Chanta. I'm sorry, that's a later case. That's a later case. So Sha'achas benefilas Rishoina kishenaflo me'achav Rishon. Where was Leah usher to Shimon? After Levi dies, there's no reason why Leah should be usher to Shimon, because by the time Levi died, Shimon had already lost his wife Leah. So where was Leah ever usher to Shimon? Leah was usher to Shimon when Reuben died. When Reuben died, Leah was usher to Shimon, and therefore Levi made the evil. So since at that point she was usher, even now we're talking about another generation. In other words, another life, another marriage. Now she was married to Levi, and Levi dies. She remains usher to Shimon. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav said, it doesn't address the Torah. I guess does she ask for her Torah? Pasha, she should ask for her Torah, right? Pasha, she asks for the Torah. Yeah. Yeah, she's also automatically Torah's also. Yeah, she's also Torah. I'll take Shizach. From Reuben.
No longer the sister. No longer the sister.
That's right. Correct. I'll take Shizach. So let's see what the Gemara says. I'm sorry?
That's not listed as Chamishas V'Nosh.
I hear. Very good. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav said his own standalone chiddush. He's not extracting it from our Mishnah.
It's a Chosisha.
Not a choshisha, because a choshisha only is when she's alive.
But the issue that's answering her.
That made it that the original Eishes Ach doesn't come off. But Eishes Ach stays forever. A choshisha doesn't. So Zakim Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav said a standalone chiddush, and this is the standalone chiddush that he said. Call Yevama, any Yevama, she'eina ni karei ba b'shas nefila Yevama yava yaleh. When she first falls to Ibam, she does not have the heter of Ibam. Harei ke'eshes ach sheyesh lebanon basura. That's exactly what he's saying. If at any time she could not have done Ibam, well, that means that the original Isser Eshes Ach remains upon her. But Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav didn't say this from the Mishnah. He said his own chiddush. The problem is my kamash malon tanina harezu asura oilav oilam is hoil v'nesra lav sha'achas. Since when Reuben died, Leah was usher to Shimon. So now the Isser Eshes Ach of Reuben's wife remains upon Leah forever toward Shimon. And even though Leah remarried Levi, and now Levi dies, it doesn't change the fact that there's still an Isser Eshes Ach on Shimon towards Leah from when Reuben died. Zok to Gemara, we still need the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, even though this halacha is pretty obvious from the Mishnah. Because Mao de Tema, Hanimili, Heichad la Ichse la b'nefila Rishon. By the Nefila Rishona, which means when he fell originally, it wasn't royal. So Rashi calls the man Nefila Rishona, when Reuben died, there was no time at all where Leah was mutter to Shimon. In other words, she was usher to Shimon when Reuben died, and even when she married Levi, and she became Oish Shemer Shavim, that entire period of time, during that entire period of time, she was usher to Reuben the entire time. But Aval Heicha, the Ichtala B'Lefila Rishona, what happens if in that period of time she would have become mutter to him? For instance, what if Shimon's wife would have died before Levi did evil, right? There, even during the first Nefila, at one point in time, she would have been mutter. She could have been mutter to Shimon. Emet history, maybe we'll say then she is mutter to Reuven, to Shimon. Kamash Malan, that even in such a case it's no good, because at the time where she felt evil, at that very first moment, the Isser Eshes Ach remained upon her, therefore it remains forever. Kamash Malan. Freak them up, but Hanami Tanin. We have another brisa to teach us this halacha. So once again, what's Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav's chiddush? Because it says in the brisa, it says the Gemara is bring down later. Shnei achen nesuin shtei achayis. Reuven and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel. Meis echad mehen, and one of them died. So Reuven dies, and now his wife Leah is also to Shimon, because Shimon's married to Leah's to Leah's sister. The Achagach Mesa is the Shoshen. Then Shimon's wife dies. So right now that Shimon's wife is no longer alive, he should be able to marry Leah. Nevertheless, Harizu Asur I love Elamis. This woman Leah will be ushered to Shimon forever. Hoyel v'nesra love shachas, because when she first fell to him, Tiyibam, she was usher al tachois isha. So that means the Isra Eshes Ach never left her, and therefore, even though Shimon eventually lost his wife, Leah remains usher to him. Zok to Gemara, there's a big difference, because over there was no third brother. So the moment she fell to Ibam, to Shimon, she was rejected from the family completely because there's no brother. So she's now going to marry Lashuk. Since there's only Reuben and Shimon, and Reuben died, Shimon cannot do Ibam on Leah because Shimon's married to Rachel, so she's done with his entire family. In our case, where Rav is talking about, there was a Levi there. So even though Leah was never able to marry Shimon, but she's still in the family, she could still do Yibam with Levi, because Levi wasn't married to a sister. So maybe Ema Migu de Chazilahai Nasu Nachris Chazanami Lahai. Maybe she still retains her connection to the family, and then when Levi dies, she should be able to go back and marry Shimon. Kamash Malon Nabidam Rav, his chiddush is that even in that case, it would not be allowed. And Tosfos actually throws a svara in that it's never mistaber to say that a woman cannot do Yibum now, but eventually she'll be able to do Yibum. Because that's a chesaron in the Recher Da'achenaya. Because this woman now is in limbo. The way things are now, status quo, she can't do Yibum, she can marry Lashuk. But you don't let her marry Lashuk, because maybe later on things are going to change and she'll become mutter. So if the Recher Da'achenaya, once a woman cannot do Yibum, B'shas Nefila, we never say that she could do Yibum, we say she will remain usher forever, because otherwise there'll be a problem with the Recher Da'achenaya. Zok the Gemara back here. Shloisha Achim. So this is a busy family. Shloisha Achim, Shnayim Mehem, Nesu and Shtei Achayos. Again, we have the same Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Reuben and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel. The Echad Nas Nachris, and Levi is married to Esther. See, the mission is very good to us. The mission is at least keeping the cases uniform. It's just a matter of the timing of the death. So until now, they were a happy family, and they were deaths. Now we're going to get more exciting. Now we're going to get into soap opera. There's going to be divorces too. So what happened was Girish Echad mi Bale Achayos Ishishto. So Reuven divorced Leah. And then Umeis Nasu Nachris. And then Levi died. So Reuven divorced Leah, and Levi dies. So now Esther falls to Yibam. Now Esther falls to Yibam, both to Reuven and to Shimon. But Reuven tells Shimon, listen, you already have a wife. You have Rachel. I already divorced my wife. So let me go for Esther. Umeis Nasu Nachris. Zok the Gemara. The Kansa, the Mishnah, the Kansa Hamagarish. Now Reuven married Esther. So now you have only two brothers who are alive. Reuven's alive, and he's married to Esther, who was Levi's almana, and Shimon's alive, married to his original wife, Rachel. The Kansa Hamagarish. And then Umeis. Now Reuven dies. So now Esther is falling to Yibam. Esther is falling to Yibam to Levi, to Shimon. Zok to Gemara, Zui Sha'amru, this is what the very first Mishnah says, that when does a tzara aser, that's only if the tzara is married to the husband at the same time as the erva itself. But over here, although Reuben had two wives, Leah and Esther, but Leah and Esther were never married to Reuben at the same time, right? So therefore, Zui Sha'amru, V'chulon Shemesu, Onisgashu, Tzarasei Mutaris. So we need to tickle our memory a little bit of how this works. So we know for sure, in the case of the Mishnah, there's a very big chiddush. Never was there a time where these two women were tzarais zu lezu. They were never tzarais zu lezu, because by the time Reuven married Esther, he had already divorced. He already had divorced Leah, right? But I want to throw in two variations. The first variation I want to throw in is the Shiloh of the Gemara later, the Gemara before. The Gemara said, what happens if, in fact, Reuben was married to both Leah and Esther at the same time, right? So Reuben is married to Esther and Leah. He did Yibum on Levi's wife, and now he's married to Esther and Leah at the same time. And then he divorces her. and then Shimon dies. So here, at the time of Shimon's death, when Rachel fell to Yibum, he was only married to Esther, not to Leah. But there was a time before. So we had a machlokes in the Gemara earlier. What triggers the Isser? Does the marriage trigger the Isser? And therefore, even though at the time of Shimon's death, Reuben was only married to Esther, but since there was a time where Esther and Leah were co-wives, Esther becomes poisoned from the marriage because there's always a potential that a Yibum will happen. So the Isser already happened at the marriage. That was one shita. The other shita was, no, you look at the time of death. When Shimon's almana, Rachel, falls to Yibum, at that point in time, when a Yibum would be triggered, who was Reuben married to? If at that point Reuben was only married to Esther, it's not a problem. Right? That was the machlokes that we had. The Gemara here is going to throw in a third variation. What's the third variation? What was the case over here? Reuben divorced his wife before Levi died. So by the time Levi died, Reuben was completely a free agent, and then he did Yibum on Levi's almana on Esther. What if first Levi died, and then he divorced his wife? So that means there was a zika. So the question is, if Levi dies first, that could be scheduled still. If Levi dies first, that means immediately Esther is zakuk Yibum to Reuben, to Shem as well, but to Reuben as well. So now they're tsarais bezika. But before he made the Yibum, he divorced his wife. So now they're tsarais bezika. Does that create an issue? So that's these are the cases that we're going to be discussing on this sugya. So let's see what the Gemara says. Taima de girish the achakach meis. Our Mishnah says a smaller chiddush. The chiddush is that he could make Yibum on Shimon's almana Rachel because he had first divorced Leah, and only then did Levi die. So the two wives, Leah and Esther, were never exposed to each other at all. Aval, a greater chiddush, were mace. If first Levi died, and only then Reuben divorced Leah, the achak girish asura. You could be medayik that from our Mishnah. How could you be medayik that from our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah could have said a bigger chiddush. Our Mishnah could have said that Reuben only divorced Leah after already Levi died, but it doesn't say that. Our Mishnah says that Reuben divorced Leah before Levi died. So vice from our Gemara, that relationship, even through a zika, would have poisoned Esther. Amarav Ashi Yosy Meresh Yesh Zika Afilu Betray Achi. Because in this case, when Levi died, his wife Esther fell to Yibum to both Reuben and Shimon. So it's not even a concentrated zika. It's a zika where it could go to Reuben, it could go to Shimon. Yet you were medayik for Mishnah that it would still enough of a zika that Reuben's wife Leah will answer him. Frank the Gemara, if you remember, at the beginning of the day, we had a Reb Nachman who brought a raya, Zoy Semeres Ein Zika V'Afilu B'Characha, and it was only because of Maimer that she became Aser. Right? Now here, from the Mishnah a little bit later, Reb Ashi is being medayik that Yesh Zika Afilu B'Treyachi. Frank the Gemara, Uli Reb Ashi, Kasha de Reb Nachman. According to Reb Ashi, who holds that our Tana holds Yesh Zika, how are we going to explain Reb Nachman? In other words, in our Mishnah's case, it says, even without the mimer, the zika alone should have passed the nachos, because he holds zika, just like he holds over here. The zika would have passed the nachos. Zok the Gemara, Amalach Avashi, no, who adin the alpha gab the loy over the mimer nachris milchach michlitz chalta yivumila mitniyab. Don't make the deal that Reb Nachman made earlier, that it's only because the Mishnah introduced a case of mimer that the sister aser the Torah. But without Maimer, the Zika alone wouldn't have allowed the sister to aser the Torah. It's not true, it would have. So why is the Mishnah saying a case of Maimer, even without Maimer, it would still be Chayletzes V'loy Mishabemis? What the Katani Maimer is Lafuke Beishamai, the Amar Maimer Koine Kinyan Gomer. Beishamai says Maimer is Koine Kinyan Gomer. So you would think that once he makes Maimer, you wouldn't even need Chalitza, because you Mamish at Torah Se'erba. Kamash Malon, the Loike Beishamai, and you still need a chalitza. But a vada yibum wouldn't be allowed even because of the zika itself. Okay, so Reb Ashi has a way to explain the earlier Mishnah. But Ula Reb Nachman, who holds ein zika, kasher de Reb Ashi. How does he explain our Mishnah? Why didn't our Mishnah say a bigger chiddush? That even if Reuven divorced Leah after Esther fell to him to Yibum, even then it would be mutter, right? Why didn't they say the bigger chiddush? So Gemara b'chitema hu adin tafilu meis the achakach girish to Rasa Muteres, and if you're going to hold that our Mishnah is lav dafka, and even if when Levi died and Esther fell to Reuben to Ibum, Reuben was still married to Leah, and only afterwards did he divorce Leah and take in Esther. If you're going to say that even there, Esther is going to be mutter to Shimon, if that's the case, if that's what you're going to say, well then Zuhi lemutemai. Let's look at the Mishnah that we just learned. The Mishnah says, Zuhi, this is the example of what we said in the first Mishnah, the first parak, that means there must be another case that's similar to this that wouldn't qualify, right? So if you learn like we just learned now in Rav Ashi, it's very good because there's two cases that are very similar to each other. If Reuven divorced his wife first and then took in Esther, that's the case where there's no problem. Esther doesn't become also to Shimon. But if Reuven didn't divorce his wife until Esther fell to Ibum, that wouldn't be the case of Tzarsei Mutaris. There, Esther will also become usher to Shimon. So that makes perfect sense. You have a Zui to be Mamayit something. But if you're going to learn that both in both cases are the same, and in both cases, Shimon could do Ibum on Esther later on, Elazuhi Lamutemai. I'll tell you what it's coming to do tonight. It's Lamuute Kanes the Achakach Girish. Maybe it's coming to mind a case where he actually made Yibum on Esther. So Reuben was actually married to Leah and Esther at the same time, and only after he did Yibum did he divorce Leah. There, if he dies later, then his wife Esther will be Asher to Shimon. Zok to Gemara, you could say that, but the problem is not everybody holds like it. Hanicha isavar l'Rabbi Yirmiyah damar taver mishashana zu loishana zu. We had a machlokes at the beginning of the first pair. What is the case? Does Misa create the Isser? And therefore, even if they were married, who was married to both wives before, as long as before they fall to Yibum, he already divorced the Erva, or maybe if they were ever co-wives, it's still a problem. So if you hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah, taver mishashana zu loishana zu, meaning v'haitana Savar Misa Mapelas, and our time one time holds Misa Mapelas. By time Savar Nisim Marishayim Apilin. So then we can say that our Mishnah here, Zui Lamute Kanav Ulusayv Kirich. If our Tana actually could hold that if Reuven was married to both Leah and Esther at the same time, then he divorced her, and then he died, Esther would be usher. So then you could say Zulimute, the case where he was married to both of them at the same time. Aliyah Savar La Karava. But if you have a Karava, the Amar La Olam Chatanu Buzuve Tzarchlamazu Katani, meaning that even in the case where there was a time where Reuben was married to both Leah and Esther at the same time, as long as by the time he dies, he had already gotten rid of the Erva, it's still good for Yibam. Well, then Lamute Mai. We don't have any case to say that our Mishnah is excluding, because in all cases, Esther will be mutter to Shimon. Zaktamar, you're right. You're 100% right, and therefore al kochach Reb Yirmiyah severely. We're actually going to have to say that if you want to learn like Reb Nachman, you'll be forced to say that if Reuben was married to Leah and Esther at the same time, even though before he dies he divorced Leah, he'll have to learn that will be usher. He'll have to learn that will be usher, because otherwise there's no case that our Mishnah could possibly be excluding. Zaktamar Ula Rava, who holds that they're both mutter as long as Reuben divorced Leah before he died, Esther will still be mutter to Shimon. According to Rava, Hanicha Isavala Karbashi, if you hold a Karbashi, Zui Lamute Mace below Girish. If Rava holds a Karbashi, so then that'll make sense. We have something for our Mishnah to be Mamayit. Our Mishnah is a case if at the time that she fell to Yibam, there was an Achosisha Bezika, meaning if first Levi died and Esther fell to Yibam to Reuben, and at that point Reuben was married to Leah, so through the Zika we consider Esther and Leah co-wives, and therefore Esther remains permanently Asher to Shimon. That would work out well. Elisavalak Rab Nachman, that ain't Zika, and in such a case, Esther would still be more to the Shimon, Zui Lamutimai. So basically, depending on what side of the machlokes you are on over there, whether or not it's Misa that creates the Isser or the marriage creates the Isser, that'll impact how you're going to have to learn over here as well, because you need at least one case to be awesome. So you have to pick which of the case that you're going to ask. Okay, now it's simple and easy again.
Yossi.
Yes.
Just wanted to mention, ever since Shlomi bought the clock, you've been going overtime every day.
Okay, so we'll stop here then. It's 6:52. We'll stop here. Shkoyach. You can't even see the clock in the picture. I was hoping you guys couldn't see it.
No, but you can.
Okay, Shkoyach. We'll stop here.